Good morning, everyone. Sorry about that. My name is Grant Fondo. I'm with Goodwin Procter. We have a very interesting panel today because we have a lawyer and an accountant on the panel. So what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about the practical and regulatory issues relating to token sales. Pretty hot item, obviously, here and really across the world now. I'm going to let them introduce themselves, but we've got somebody who has already done a token launch. They were one of the early ones out the door. We have another company here who is in the middle of it. Theirs is public, and they're about halfway through. We have another person who has helped over 450 companies raise $3 billion. So, and then we also have the accountant here to talk about all the tax issues. So with that, Scott, if you can start and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. Hi, my name is Scott Morgan. I'm a co-founder of Airbits, and I'm now the chief crypto officer of a company called Matrix, which is It's actually software. Matrix is our platform. We are creating 3D virtual reality type of graphics that will be stored in the blockchain and viewable by VR. Thanks.
I'm Wendy Jackson. I'm a senior manager in international tax at Deloitte, and we provide a variety of tax services associated with ICOs. We've been in this space, crypto space, for about 5 years, and then in the ICO space for roughly 6 months or so, and have assisted on several ICOs.
Hi, my name is George Lee. I'm the CEO and co-founder of WeTrust. We ran an ICO in March to April timeframe of this year. WeTrust is a company that aims to improve financial inclusion on a global scale using blockchain technology. And after the ICO, we've been working on product, and we are planning for a product launch by end of the year.
Hi, my name is Teitelman. I founded and was a CEO for about 7 years of this organization called StartX, which is an accelerator for Stanford alumni. StartX was founded because we saw some significant gaps in training for entrepreneurs in the ecosystem and a lot of bottlenecking of information, resources, and support in venture capitalists. And so we wanted to build an organization, which is a nonprofit, which helps entrepreneurs help each other. We've supported around 600 companies now, raised around $3.5 billion. A lot of ICOs like Protocol Labs with Filecoin is the StartX company as well as WeTrust.
And again, I'm Grant Fondo. I'm a partner with Goodwin in Silicon Valley. I'm head of our digital currency and blockchain group. I'm a former federal prosecutor in Northern District, California, representing a bunch of companies in regulatory issues, and currently represent Coinbase in its battle with the IRS. I'm also head of our token sales group, and we have a couple dozen right now in the pipeline, so it's a pretty active time, as you can imagine. So with that, George, you've been both launched and you've also advised companies on token launches. Can you describe for the audience what you think makes a successful token launch?
So I think the most important part of the ICO process is having a project that actually really truly benefits from this process of creating a network of supporters, a community. When we first started the process, we thought that the ICO was very similar to a Kickstarter for software. And I think conventional wisdom is that projects that benefit the most from an ICO are projects that need a network effect. Basically, you need a critical mass of people using a product before it becomes useful. But as time goes on, I've also seen the evolution of ICOs to include, it's becoming closer and closer like a Kickstarter, which, if you look at Kickstarter, there's indie films, there's very niche types of interests and projects. And I think ICOs have the potential to be that, but for software.
So Scott, you're in the middle of a token sale now. Can you describe kind of the key components, the partnerships that you've got to enter into to make a successful launch?
Yeah, sure, thanks. I think the hardest thing about a token sale is trying to get the right people at the right time in the right places. Anybody going through a token issuance right now is going to realize this game is going really fast. It's a fast dance. You don't want to have multiple partners lined up, but you have to because you're not sure exactly if someone's going to be too busy to handle what you need. There's no harm, no foul at this point. I mean, everybody's just working hard, trying to do what they got to do, but you got to have good law, you got to have good legal. That's definitely number one, especially if you're in the United States. If you're onshore, you got to have good legal because there's so many landmines. I can't tell you how many times I had to rename it from from basically internet, some kind of token issuance to some other words. So you got to make it clean. It's all about intent. But the idea is you got to have a really good attorney, you have a really good accountant, you have the really good PR, because you're building a community. And the PR is going to be different than your press. So you got to have people who can really put out good assets. And then you got to have a really good person internally that can calendar and can make sure that your schedule doesn't bump into someone else's, and that you're actually going to places that people are interested in hearing your message. So I think that's where I'll leave the last one. So you got to go to places where people are interested in the message you have, because you're going to narrow it down to a certain degree. You can't cover all bases with everybody. So you got to figure out what's important. And the messaging is that.
So Wendy, I think one of the biggest surprise for entrepreneurs when they come into the office is all the tax issues they have to deal with. Can you, and how early you have to deal with it, can you walk through some of those tax issues at a high level so people get a sense of kind of when they should get accountants involved and what the issues are?
Yeah, I mean, you want to get the accountants involved at least to help prepare you for what you need to be thinking about. It is easier to get the accountants involved, and I'll let you comment on the attorneys as well. When you have a very clear picture of what you're going to do and what your mature token ecosystem looks like, because that's going to help us really kind of think through, what the tax considerations are going to be both for your launch and then long term. The biggest consideration is, is if you're planning an ICO, is that a taxable event for you? And that is probably the strongest consideration. We do need to look at what types of income you're earning and then what the properties of the token. But that is a key consideration. Another one is of course going to be state tax considerations as well. Where are you in terms of where are your touch points in states, and sales tax as well. If you're selling into the U.S. and you have potential nexus. Some people really want to do a legal foundation, which I think we'll probably talk about again. But there are specific considerations about trying to get tax-exempt status, and then of course these launches are global. So what are the foreign tax considerations? Are there VAT, value-added tax considerations? Right? The United States doesn't have VAT, but most of the rest of the world does. So these are the kinds of things you want to be thinking about, just so I don't leave it out. Compensation, I know there's also a legal aspect to that too, but if you're going to give tokens as compensation, that's something you need to navigate, and potential withholding taxes on that.
Wendy, where are you seeing a lot of the companies set up? A lot of companies are going offshore for tax purposes. Where are some of the leading countries that you're seeing people set up operations?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we do see companies going to Cayman Islands because it is a flexible jurisdiction. They see it as the first step in essentially trying to create a more global organization. It is what I say flexible because people find that the VAT implications maybe are easier to deal with. But that's not, if people go offshore, they've gone to Singapore. People explored Gibraltar, Malta, Switzerland. There are places all around the world where people obviously explore, and then Israel, and let me be clear about this. If you are going to launch from a foreign jurisdiction, but you're a U.S. person, there's still a lot of attendant U.S. tax consequences to consider with that. But then you also have to consider, how's the foreign jurisdiction going to view this, both from a tax and regulatory perspective?
All right, so you mentioned the foundation issue. A lot of people, when they get involved in this process, think immediately, I want to do this as a foundation. Can you just talk about what you're seeing out there and what's your general advice about whether a foundation is a good idea or not, and if so, when?
Well, whether or not a legal foundation is a good idea really depends on your business. What are you going for? Is this something you really believe in terms of the structure and how you think your stakeholders are viewing you? And if that's important, then we think that's a great path. Whether or not you're a legal foundation is a separate question as to whether you have tax-exempt status. And a lot of jurisdictions, including the United States, have very narrowly defined functions and goals for a tax-exempt entity. And it's a relatively untrodden path, and it can also it can be a process. It can take, in some jurisdictions, 6 months or more to get tax exempt status. So, the timing of your ICO is another sort of strong consideration there.
So as you all know, the token sales have really started to disrupt the traditional VC markets as well as lending. But there's pros and cons with everything. So I'm going to ask a couple of you guys. We'll start maybe with Cameron. Cameron, what do you think the pros and cons are of going the traditional VC route versus the token route?
Yeah, so I like what George said about the token sales as a form of like a software Kickstarter and crowd sale, because really what this technology is enabling, which is really cool, is access outside of Silicon Valley to participate in some of that innovation. And what we've seen a lot at StartX, because we've supported about 150 biotech medical device companies, is that in Silicon Valley there's this kind of flavor of the month concept where when the hot thing comes up, everyone floods towards that, even if the ideas are terrible. If there's one that's potentially possible, they all want to be in on it. And then all these investors, these VCs have their own investors. And so if they make a mistake and invest in the flavor of the month, then they can say, oh, well, everyone else did that, which is crazy herd mentality. It doesn't make any sense. But if they invest in some outlier, in some crazy thing that no one believes in but doesn't work, like a biotech company, then their LPs are looking at them like, what the heck is wrong with you? And so having the token sales enables you to not have the constraints that a lot of the funding ecosystem has been focused around both kind of the flavor of the month as well as also creating longer term thinking. And the second thing I'd say is that I've always thought of investors as advisors, people that you bring onto your team to add strategic and tactical value to your company. And a lot of investors sometimes don't think that way. They just think that they're an owner of your company and they're a controller. And so I think what this does is it also, if you do a token, if it makes sense for you, it also gives you more flexibility in what advisors/investors you take on.
George, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, I think, again, to kind of add more to the earlier point, that's software for Kickstarter. There's a lot of projects, perhaps ours included. Our product is to improve financial inclusion, which doesn't appeal to everyone. It may not have a huge market size, but there is a group of supporters who are very passionate about this. They're very passionate about the different ways you can use technology to solve this problem, and therefore they're willing to contribute and support this cause. And I think that's one thing that ICOs can really help by, kind of like Amazon having the long tail of different kinds of books that you can buy. ICOs now democratizes all the different little projects that don't appeal to everyone, but they all perhaps have a core, strong following. And you don't have to appeal to everyone to launch a successful software project or service. The second thing that I wanted to mention was, sorry, I had it in my notes.
Sorry, I'm gonna jump in while I do that. I think there's one negative, like significant negative, is that it's been like statistically, not I'm gonna say statistically proven, but the general norm is that if people overfund themselves and raise too much money, they do not succeed, even very successful entrepreneurs. And so I think with the amount of money that's in the space for ICOs, there's a very big risk in bloating how much cash you have on hand, which creates very funky psychology when you need to focus on trying to create new disruptive business models. And so there's way too many people thinking about the ICO as just like, oh, we raised money, we're successful now. It's like, no, like the ICO is not what makes you successful, it's the long-term value that your token creates. And so too many people are thinking about the short-term raise versus the long-term, what new type of value is a blockchain creating?
Yeah, so the second point is, having gone through StartX and gone through the gauntlet of raising funding from VCs, most VCs have certain criteria as far as, the exit size, the potential. Is this going to be potentially a $100 million or $1 billion company? It's okay if it's like a 1% probability, but they're really looking for a certain type of company. And so that kind of excludes a lot of types of companies right off the bat. So again, that's just another way to look at how ICOs can help fund projects that might not have mass appeal.
Scott, you want to try it?
Yeah, no, I mean, those are great points. So I'm just going to kind of I'm going to go old school, new school. So old school is what you talk about a balance sheet. You're talking a balance sheet swap. It's like somebody comes in, takes equity, and just like George Orwell's 1984, no one ever takes power to give it up. So it's like, if you give equity to people, you got to make sure they're on your team, or else the whole decentralization thing we're all trying to go for, that's horseshit. So if you're really going to do the decentralized thing, you have to go token issuance. I mean, that thing's got to be able to sit by itself, just like Bitcoin. You don't like it, don't buy it. Bitcoin has got this thing called the Constitution. That's called the blockchain. You vote democracy while using your coins. If you like something, you use your Bitcoin. You don't like something, you don't. I don't care if you replace it with Ethereum, whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, if you're going to do the old school and rail with equity, fine. But also you're giving a lot of people a lot less way to get out of the balance sheet, because now they got equity. And guess what? As we see with politicians, you got equity, you're going to want some skin in the game. And that's usually in perpetuity. So we want to write a contract that's called a white paper. The white paper says, look, this is what we're going to do. Okay, now our lawyers advise us, okay, we got to have a little bit of gray space, cool. But at the end of the day, we're building this because of X, Y, Z. And if you don't like it, don't buy the ICO. So an ICO is like a great dinner, okay? Right, I spent $300 for a nice dinner with my wife. Super fun, I remember it. Great. Most people got in Ether for a really low price. So it's like, hey, you're throwing down on something. It's not going to cost you much maybe. So look at it as a consumable. It may or may not work out, but if it does, great. And now everybody can participate. It isn't just some guy who calls himself a VC and went to Yale or Harvard or some other big school who supposedly knows more than you do. So yeah, that's democracy in action. So sorry, I went off.
Most investor relationships last longer than the average marriage.
Well stated.
All right, we'll get those stats for you after the show. So, Scott, since you're so passionate about this, I'm going to lead in the next thing. What we are seeing, the evolution of the token sales that we're seeing started out, most of the early token sales tended to not be VC-backed. And now you're seeing companies doing token sales that are VC-backed, even several rounds. And so what I'm interested from you guys' perspective is, what's the tensions there and what's the conflict when you've got VCs, you've got investors, but you've also got founders and employees, and if you make the decision to issue tokens to either investors or employees, what's the tensions and where do you see sort of the battlegrounds, and do you have any solutions?
Well, I mean, the immediate...
Other than screw the VCs.
Yeah, no, I don't think anyone wants to screw anybody in this. We're all on for the ride. It's like, hey, the fire's already started. Let's just get on the board and ride that thing. If you got a VC and you got some people with VC, you just got to sit down with them and say, what do you want? Do you want the quick flash in the pan? If you want to just trade this thing and spin it, fine. That's your deal. We are looking for long-term commits. We already have a product that works, for example, on our behalf, right? But trying to explain when you put two buzzwords, which we have, basically VR and blockchain, everybody asks me, so where's Paris Hilton? I'm like, no, we're true, serious, read the white paper, get back to me type thing. So if your VC is coming on board and he just wants a quick pop, that's cool. I mean, a lot of people in there for that, but you got to look at a partner. Just as much as you do with your accountants, your attorneys, they're partners. And they bring money, but they bring money with a much different, again, they're not getting equity. They have to ascertain the white paper, and it's like, yeah, you may give them a discount legally, but it's like you also have to say, look, you got skin in the game. So if you got skin in the game, you just got to go with a partner that is willing to commit to whatever your roadmap is.
Cameron, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so one of the primary drivers for why I founded Stardex was that the current structure of VC investment is inherently misaligned already. And so the question about does the ICO misalign equity investors is kind of off, I think, a little bit, because when investors invest in you, they have all these different incentives with their fund. They may need to return their fund in 2 years. They may need to diversify their fund, and so they won't follow on. There's all these things that actually create structural misalignment with the long-term success of the company. So from my perspective, people who can hold tokens and can leave, like you said, like they can leave or join whenever they want, and it's a community that you're supporting, that's actually a lot more alignment, I think. And then there's this concept of whether the if you already have equity investors, I think it's highly unethical to just raise a token and take a bunch of coins as a team and not include the people that helped you be successful. And so I'm a strong believer in this concept of share equitably in the success you create, and I think tokens are an excellent facilitator of that. But if you have people that have already purchased equity in your company, you should give them the option to, at a significant discount, participate alongside with your tokens. If they don't want to, then that's fine. But, you shouldn't feel bad
Cameron,
about it.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, sure,
I mean,
of
I don't
course.
want you to disagree, but I really think that the equity writers are the freeholders. I mean, they're the free ride. Because now all of a sudden, if you do have a successful token issuance, you've got all this money that comes in, it props your balance sheet up. Guess what happens with equity? So really, the equity writers are the freeholders. They're free. They're riding for free on this.
They're owners in the company. If the company owns 100% of those tokens, then they ride for free, sure. But if the team separately from the company takes money, that's like saying we earned $10 million of revenue, and so the founders are going to pay themselves $2 million of the revenue we created as a company. That's insane. You're never going to pay yourself $2 million salary. So what I'm saying is that if you do that, which is okay, I think it's okay for the founders to be and the team to be aligned with that, future projected revenue and own the token.
Well,
but let the
that's the
investors
reason
join.
why we didn't take a token for us.
Yeah, sure.
Because again, we want to be aligned through the equity because we get equity too. So it's like
That's what
we're
we
part
do.
of the free ride too. So I don't mean to argue with you. Just maybe a point of difference.
I would be
Argue
remiss
away.
if I didn't say there are tax considerations associated
Of course.
with that.
Yeah, so there's one thing that
And there are legal considerations.
Yeah, there's one thing that wasn't mentioned is a lot of people, they're rightfully concerned about the alignment of the token holders and the project team. And there's a lot of concern that, hey, there's not that equity component that, if a VC invests in a company, there is alignment because of that equity holding. But I do want to point out that, a lot of teams, when they raise funding, for example, ourselves, from a big group of people, a lot of supporters, in many ways, there's even maybe more pressure to really deliver and do well because now you have a community of 2,000 people that you're accountable to, not just 2 or 3 individuals who represent the LPs who have also invested in many other successful companies, right? So I think it's not entirely it is a concern if the project team is malicious, but I think as long as the project team has good faith, in many ways, the accountability and the burden to deliver perhaps could be even greater than that if they were invested in by VCs.
Yeah, I mean, the company owns the tokens. It's an asset. And so they should be aligned to increase the asset value of the company, which is perfectly fine. And just to echo what you said, I know this is like a cardinal sin to say IPO, but like ICOing or selling tokens is you have a community that you're accountable to, and that's a significant reputational risk. And so I think some people aren't thinking about that, and that it's actually a higher degree of accountability from my perspective than even having traditional investors.
Okay, last question. We've got about 30 seconds for each of us. What's your practical, in 30 seconds, advise the audience, what are the practical lessons relating to doing a token sale?
Practical lesson is just line up your intent with what you really want. I mean, if you can achieve that through some other method and people are going to accuse you of raising a token for cash, see if there's another method. Otherwise, make sure you really, really know why you're raising that token and make sure that when somebody asks you what you're raising the token for, you know the intent. Because everybody's going to ask that question, whether you drive a Lambo or not, so.
Along similar lines, I would say, begin with the end in mind. So really, the more that you can do to refine what you're trying to do, what your ecosystem looks like, who the stakeholders are, and really map that out, the more efficient your advisors are going to be in being able to help you.
I think, if you're thinking about doing a crowd sale, think about 6 months in the future where this market is going to be, right? When we were doing ours, we were planning in September or October of last year for something to happen in March. But now, the market is constantly changing, it's moving so quickly. So you will really need to see where is the market going to be when you actually do your crowd sale and how to be prepared for that.
The founders that we've seen that have been the most successful have been very intentional about building trusted relationships and utilizing other entrepreneurs and helping each other. And so the number one thing I think you should do is build a trusted group of other entrepreneurs that you can believe what they tell you, you trust them. It's very important. When things are crazy like this, there's a lot of people that will do funky things for weird incentives. So build a trusted group of people around you that can support you.
So most token sales are utility token sales. What I would advise you is just because you label a token sale a utility token doesn't mean it's going to be. And so even if your platform looks like a utility, you have to be consistent in every step, everything you say, everything you do. And there's a lot of inflection points along the way. Sometimes you won't take our advice, and that's okay. But you need to be thoughtful about it and recognize that it's an overall picture that someone might look down the road 6 to 12 months down the road. And so I think one super quick question.
So many people, if you've moved into the secondary market, where's the accountability back to the coin holder? And are you really just burning down the cash, bringing down the value of the coin? There's no cash behind it? I'm a little confused there.
Yeah, so ideally the company holds a good amount of it. If you just sell it 100%, you cash. But if the company's holding a good amount of the coin, then there's an incentive to actually do what's right, do right by the token holders, or else the market tanks and no one cares and it's not valuable. The cash is cash.
Yeah, again, with cash, I mean, the whole point about doing this is actually to do a race so you can build what you're going to build. So it comes back to intent again. If you don't like the team, sell. Now, most of these teams like us, we don't talk about secondary markets. We're not supposed to talk about secondary markets, but a secondary market will definitely cover us. That's their intent. Now, what are the game they play, pump, dump? I don't know. I don't care. The point is, the token that we have is for a specific purpose. We keep our community updated. This is what we're doing. This is what we're going to achieve. We give roadmaps. If you don't like the roadmap, then you just say, fine, sell the token.
Yeah, so we're going to have to go because I know they're trying to keep on schedule, but the tokens are not a security. The tokens are not an investment in that context. So there is no, per se, financial reporting. You are buying a token to use on the platform. There's plenty of things that may drive the value of it, but I apologize. We have to go. I'm happy to talk offline, but thank you everyone very much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.